Hello and welcome to Alden Carrow's Poetry Podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, author of Cumbrian verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry. This show is about slowing down, listening closely, and discovering the poetry that lives in both the extraordinary and the everyday. This week I begin with a guest poem, something from the wider world of poetry that inspires me or continues to resonate. Then I'll share one of my own poems. After that, for our discussion this week, how to use Claude AI to assist with the creative process. And then finally, I'll invite you, the listeners, to suggest future guest poems to read out on my show. Today, we are navigating a theme that is etched into the very landscape of the North, but also into the history of human labour, the theme of extraction. Usually when we hear that word, we think of geology. We think of coal pulled from the seams of Durham, or iron from the Cleveland Hills, or lead from the Pennines. We think of the earth being opened up and its riches taken out, leaving a hollow space behind. But extraction is not just a geological process, it's also a human one. There is an extraction of energy, of time, and of spirit that happens when industry demands more than the body can reasonably give. For our guest poem today, I've chosen a piece that serves as a grim, rhythmic monument to this human extraction. It's The Song of the Shirt by Thomas Hood. Written in 1843, this poem was published in Punch magazine, and it caused an absolute sensation at the time. It was written in memory of a Mrs. Biddle, a seamstress and a widow who lived in wretched poverty and died from what was essentially exhaustion and starvation. Hood wrote this not as a celebration of a shirt, but as a protest, a rhythmic, relentless cry against the conditions of the working poor in Victorian England. It explores how a person's life force is slowly extracted, stitch by stitch, until there is nothing left but a shell. Before I read it, I want you to listen to the metre. Hood was a master of rhythm, and in this poem he creates a beat that mimics the mechanical, repetitive motion of the needle. It's frantic, breathless, and monotonous. It doesn't flow like a river, it ticks like a clock or chugs like a piston. It captures the sound of a life being used up. The poem takes place in a garret, a small, cold attic room where a woman sits plying her needle and thread. But notice the imagery Hood uses. He speaks of the phantom of a crumb, the lack of birds, the lack of sun. The extraction here is total. The industry hasn't just taken her labour, it has taken her connection to nature, to rest and to love. It's a harrowing piece, but a necessary one, reminding us that behind every manufactured object in history, there's a human story, often one of great cost. Here is The Song of the Shirt by Thomas Hood. With fingers weary and worn, with eyelids heavy and red, a woman sat in womanly rags, plying her needle and thread, stitch, 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 in poverty, hunger and dirt, and still with a voice of dolorous pitch, she sang the song of the shirt. Work, 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 while the cock is crowing aloof, and work, 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 till the stars shine through the roof. It's oh to be a slave, along with the barbarous Turk, where woman has never a soul to save, if this is Christian work. Work, 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 till the brain begins to swim. Work, 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 till the eyes are heavy and dim. Seam and gusset and band and gusset and seam, till over the buttons I fall asleep and sew them on in a dream. O men with sisters dear, O men with mothers and wives, it is not linen you're wearing out, but human creatures' lives. Stitch, 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 in poverty, hunger and dirt, sewing at once with a double thread, a shroud as well as a shirt. But why do I talk of death, that phantom of grisly bone? I hardly fear his terrible shape, it seems so like my own, it seems so like my own, because of the fasts I keep, O God, that bread should be so dear, and flesh and blood so cheap. Work, 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 my labour never flags, and what are its wages? A bed of straw, a crust of bread and rags, that shattered roof and this naked floor, a table, a broken chair, and a wall so blank, my shadow I thank for sometimes falling there. Work, 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 from weary chime to chime. Work, 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 as prisoners work for crime. Band and gusset and seam, band and gusset and seam, till the heart is sick and the brain is benumbed as well as the weary hand. Work, work, work in the dull December light, and work, work, work when the weather is warm and bright, while underneath the eaves the brooding swallows cling, as if to show me their sunny backs and twit me with the spring. Oh, but to breathe the breath of the cowslip and primrose sweet, with the sky above my head and the grass beneath my feet, for only one short hour, to feel as I used to feel, before I knew the woes of want and the walk that costs a meal. Oh, but for one short hour, a respite however brief, no blessed leisure for love or hope, but only time for grief. A little weeping would ease my heart, but in their briny bed, my tears must stop, for every drop hinders needle and thread. With fingers weary and worn, with eyelids heavy and red, a woman sat in unwomanly rags, plying her needle and thread. Stitch, 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 in poverty, hunger and dirt, and still with a voice of dolorous pitch, would that its tone could reach the rich, she sang this song of the shirt. It's difficult to sit in the silence that follows a poem like that. The rhythm is so pervasive, so insistent, that when it stops you feel the exhaustion yourself. Hood achieves something remarkable here. He uses the very form of the poem to replicate the trauma of the subject. Let's look at that rhyme again. That rhythm, stitch, 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 and work, work, work. These monosyllabic repetitions are percussive. They hit the ear like a hammer. There's no flowery language in those lines, no softness. It creates a sense of entrapment. The poem feels claustrophobic because the metre doesn't allow you to take a deep breath. You're forced to march along with the seamstress, stitch by stitch, with no pause for reflection. The central metaphor of the poem is one of the most powerful in Victorian literature. It is not the linen you're wearing out, but human creatures' lives. This is the core of our theme today, extraction. Hood is arguing that the consumer isn't just buying a product, they're consuming the vitality of another human being. The shirt becomes a vampire of sorts, or rather, the economic system acts as one. He explicitly says she is sewing a shroud as well as a shirt. The garment that will clothe a living person is simultaneously the garment that prepares the worker for her grave. It's a chilling juxtaposition of life and death woven into the same fabric. Consider also the stanza about the swallows. The brooding swallows cling as if to show me their sunny backs and twit me with the spring. This is the only moment where the outside world intrudes, and it's cruel. Nature, usually a source of solace in poetry, here becomes a torment. The cowslip and primrose sweet are not present realities, they're painful memories. The extraction of her labour has severed her bond with the earth. She can't afford to weep because tears blur her vision, and if she can't see, she can't sew, and if she can't sew, she doesn't eat. My tears must stop, for every drop hinders needle and thread. That's the ultimate extraction. when even the bodily function of grieving is stolen for the sake of efficiency. Hood's poem was a piece of social activism, but structurally it remains a masterpiece of using sound to convey suffering. The dolorous pitch he mentioned is carried through the vowel sounds, the low O's of bone and own, the sharp I's of stitch and pitch. It's a song, yes, but it's a song of mechanical despair. It reminds us that extraction leaves behind a spoil heap, even if that spoil heap is a human body. Moving from the cramped garrets of Victorian London, I want to take you now to the open, wind-scoured heights of the North Pennines. We're staying with the theme of extraction, but moving from the textile industry to the mineral one, and shifting our gaze from the person to the place. My poem for this episode is titled Alston. Alston is a town in Cumbria, often cited as the highest market town in England. It sits up on the roof of the Pennines, a place of extreme weather and stark beauty. But Alston, and the Nent Valley below it, was also the heart of the lead mining industry for centuries. The hillsides there are not just natural slopes, they are scarred by what are known as hushings. Hushing was a method of mining where miners would build a dam high up a hill, collect water, and then release it in a massive torrent to scour away the topsoil and reveal the veins of lead ore beneath. It was a violent act of geology, literally stripping the skin off the earth. Today, those scars are covered in grass, but they're still visible, distinct V-shapes cut into the valley sides. I visited Alston recently on a cold evening. I drove up the Hartside Pass, which is a formidable climb, and felt that sensation of leaving the ordinary world behind. The air is thinner, sharper. The stone buildings are thick, built to withstand a brutal winter. I wanted to capture the feeling of a town that was built for an industry that has largely vanished, leaving behind a quiet, stoic community living among the monuments of what was taken out. This poem is about the journey up, the vertical ascent, and the strange silence that hangs over a landscape that has been thoroughly worked. It touches on the Quaker history of the area. The London Lead Company was Quaker-owned, and they built chapels and schools, leaving a legacy of solid Quaker coin. But mostly, it is about the town as a terminus, a limit. When the snow comes, Alston can be cut off from the world for days. It's a place where the extraction has ended, and the stone is slowly reclaiming its territory. Here is Alston. Front Street climbs until the breath runs short, where cobbles pitch against the gravity of fell. It's a steep extraction of the bone, this vertical ascent to thin, sharp air, the highest market stone in all the land. Below, the hushings scar the open slope, where water stripped the heavy veins of lead. The Nent runs clear of profit and of trade, and spoil heaps sit unmoved by human touch, monuments to what was taken out. The narrow gauge ends here, against the hill, a steel precision halted by the height. There is no further forward, only back, past chapels built on solid Quaker coin that stand broadly against the weather's bite. When Hartside closes in the blinding drift, the town becomes the limit of the world. We are the terminus, the final stop. As sun retreats behind the western ridge, and stone returns to stone in evening cold. In Alston, I wanted to explore the physical sensation of the landscape. The first stanza begins with the breath running short. That is a literal experience in Alston. The hills are steep, the air is thin, but it also mirrors the exhaustion we saw in Hood's poem. Here, however, it is the steep exaction of the bone. The landscape demands something from you just by being there. It resists you. Cobbles pitch against the gravity of fell. There is a tension between the human attempt to pave and civilise and the mountain's desire to pull everything back down. The second stanza deals directly with the history of extraction. The hushings scar the open slope. I use the word scar deliberately. A hush is a wound that has healed over but left a mark. It is a memory of violence done to the land. The Nent runs clear of profit and of trade. The river Nent was once heavily polluted with lead and zinc. Now it runs clear, but that clarity signifies the absence of the industry that built the town. The spoil heaps are mentioned as monuments. We usually build monuments to heroes or victories, but in the north our monuments are often piles of waste rock, reminders of the labour and the minerals that were removed. I also wanted to touch on the idea of the terminus. There's a narrow gauge railway in Alston, the South Townside Railway, and it literally stops there. There is no further forward, only back. This line is about geography, but also about time. In post-industrial towns, there's often a feeling that the future is less certain than the past. The Quaker coin refers to the benevolence of the mining companies that provided for the workers, yet that provision was still rooted in the extraction of lead. It creates a complex legacy, chapels built on the spoil of the earth. The final stanza brings in the weather, which is the ultimate governing force in Alston. When Hartside closes in the blinding drift. Hartside Pass is notorious for snow. When it closes, the town is isolated. It becomes the limit of the world. I ended with stone returns to stone in evening cold. This is the reversal of extraction. We took the stone out, we built with it, we profited from it. But eventually, the activity ceases, the heat of industry fades, and the town settles back into the geology it came from. It's a sombre thought, but there's a peace in it too, a recognition that the land outlasts us. And now we come to our discussion segment. For our discussion segment today, I want to pivot from the extraction of lead and labour to a very different kind of process, the organisation of creativity. Specifically, I want to talk about a tool that I've been using recently to help plan and edit my poetry collections, including the upcoming works I'm drafting. That tool is AI, specifically Claude AI. Now, I know the mention of AI in the arts can bristle. It feels counterintuitive. Poetry is the most human of forms. It's the breath, the soul, the subjective experience. How can a machine, a large language model, have any place in that? Now, I want to be very clear. I don't use AI to write my poems. The spark, the drafting, the word choice, the wrestling with the image, that's my work. That's the joy of it. If I give that away, I wouldn't be a poet anymore. I'd just be a prompter. However, where I have found this technology incredibly useful is in the role of an editor, a curator, and a creative partner. Writing a book of poetry is not just about writing 76 good poems. It's about architecture. It's about sequencing. It's about finding the golden thread that connects a poem about a seagull in Whitby to a poem about a mine in Alston. This is where the extraction theme of today's episode takes on a new light, extracting order from chaos. When I was working on Cumbria in verse, Lakes to Fells in poetry, I had a notebook filled with scribbles, disparate ideas, and half-finished verses. I had poems about the moors, the coast, the railways, and the farming life. I felt overwhelmed by the volume of material. I used Claude as a sounding board. I would feed it the themes of my poems, not the text itself always, but the concepts, and ask it to help me brainstorm structures. For example, I might say, Claude, I have 10 poems about water. Some are about the fells, some about the River Eden, and some about the coast. How can I sequence these to tell a story of a river's journey? And it would suggest a narrative arc, starting at the source, the trickle in the heather, moving through the industrial towns, and ending at the vastness of the ocean. It helped me see the lakes to fell structure more clearly than I could see it myself, because I was too close to the individual bricks to see the house. Another way I use it is for what I call thematic excavation. I might paste in a draft of a poem that feels stuck. I'll ask, what are the dominant metaphors in this piece and where am I mixing them? It acts like a very objective critic. It might say, you start with the imagery of fire, but in the third stanza you switch to maritime imagery and it dilutes the effect. That's incredibly helpful. It's the kind of feedback you usually have to buy a friend a very expensive dinner to get, and even then they might be too polite to tell you. There's also the loneliness of the writer to consider. Writing is a solitary act. Sometimes at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, you just want to bounce an idea off someone. Does the word hushing convey the sound of water or just silence? You can have that dialogue with the AI. It forces you to articulate your own artistic intentions. Often, in explaining to AI what I'm meant to do, I realise how to fix the poem myself. It acts as a mirror. For this episode, for instance, thinking about extraction, I brainstormed with Claude about different types of extraction. We discussed dental extraction, mineral extraction, and the extraction of data. It helped me hone in on the specific contrast between the textile labour in Hood's poem and the landscape scarring in my own. It didn't write the script, but it helped clear the brush so I could walk the path. Of course, there are dangers. You can over-polish. You can let the machine smooth out the rough edges that make a poem interesting. A poem shouldn't be perfect, it should be human. It should have a limp or a stutter if that limp or stutter tells the truth. So I'm always careful to reject advice that makes the work feel generic. I use it to organise, to critique structure, and to check for clarity, but never to replace the emotional core. So, if you're a writer struggling with a manuscript, staring at a pile of pages and wondering how they fit together, I would encourage you to experiment with these tools, not as authors, but as assistants. Treat it like a librarian who has read everything and can help you file your own thoughts. It's about using the technology to clear the mental clutter so that the real work, the human work of observation and feeling, can shine through. Now you've listened to one of my poems and we've discussed how to use AI, I'd love to hear from you. If there's a poem you'd like me to feature as a guest poem in a future episode, please email me at aldencarroll78@gmail.com. That's aldencarroll78@gmail.com. It could be a classic, something modern, or even a personal favourite that means a lot to you. This way, the podcast becomes a shared journey. So, thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, may you find the poetry in the everyday, and I look forward to speaking to you again on Wednesday.